As a psychological ploy, or so Bob Arum claims to this day, the British promoters had initially assigned Hagler and his party to another hotel, but between the traffic and the all-night noise, Marvin could not sleep. Bailey's was no doubt considered a demotion, but a blue-collar boxer from Brockton wouldn't have known the difference. Hagler was every bit as comfortable there as he might have been at the more elegant Dorchester just up the street. Bailey's was located in Kensington, near the Gloucester Road, by the underground stop. Each morning before breakfast, Marvin, along with Goody Petronelli and the sparring partners, did his road work in Hyde Park. Convinced that he had been the victim of at least a larcenous decision and possibly a betting coup, Marvin blamed the outcome of the Antuofermo fight on the Las Vegas judges and vowed never again to leave the outcome to the whims of mere mortals, especially in a town where hundreds of thousands of dollars might be riding on the outcome at the sportsbook windows. Nevada might have been the only place in America where one could legally bet on a fight in 1980, but it wasn't the only one in the world. One afternoon in London, I went out and surveyed several betting shops, where I was surprised to discover that Minter was holding firm as an 11-10 favorite. At that attractive price, I placed a bet on Hagler. When I got back to Bailey's that day, Marvin was sitting with Pat and Goody Petronelli in the coffee shop when I started to reveal the results of my reconnaissance mission. Marvin abruptly shouted, "I don't want to hear it," and stormed out of the room, convinced that the only way he might lose the fight would be at the behest of gambling interests. Hagler was just superstitious enough to believe that advanced knowledge of the odds might somehow open the door for hanky-panky. Although Hagler was an American challenging for an undisputed world championship, Ali was fighting Holmes at Caesar's Palace for the heavyweight title a few nights later, so the stateside press contingent was relatively small. Besides myself, Leigh Montville was in London, covering the fight for the Boston Globe, as was Frank Stoddard for Hagler's hometown Brockton Enterprise. Sports Illustrated saved expenses by assigning the fight to its resident Brit, Clive Gammon. ABC would televise the bout back to the US, but I don't recall seeing Al Michaels or Howard Cosell until the night of the fight. Antuofermo scored a gig as a commentator for Italian television, and most evenings Vito would join Montville, Stoddard, Angie Carlino, and Jimmy Quirk, and me, along with Bernie Lafrata, who would help Aaron package the European nights and whatever Fleet Street scribes happened to be around. The Stanhope Arms across the street, where the publican was an affable Irishman named Peter Flood, thus ensuring that the establishment offered yet another London rarity, a decent pint of Guinness. The 5-hour time difference in our favour, along with the British licensing laws then in effect, sometimes made for an odd drinking schedule. Since both Minter's and Hagler's sparring sessions were conducted in the local gyms above the pubs, Minter made the Thomas A. Beckett in South London his training headquarters. We often got a head start on the evening session, but somehow the stories got filed. Another presence who arrived a few days before the fight was Fulgencio Obligimus, a tall Venezuelan middleweight who had advanced to number 1 in the WBA rankings and thus loomed the mandatory challenger for the winner of Hagler and Minter. Alan Minter was represented by a consortium of Mickey Duff, Terry Lawless and Mike Barrett. Arum was Hagler's promoter of record, but Rip Valente, the legendary Boston octogenarian, who as Sam Silverman's partner and later successor staged most of Hagler's early fights, also had a piece of the American challenger, as did Rodolfo Sabatini, a courtly Italian godfather, whose mysteriously inherited interest in the 160-pound title dated back to the days of Nino Benvenuti. There was a strange ongoing dispute, me and Sabatini on one side, and Duff and Astaire on the other, revealed Aram. They were supposed to have a piece of the options on Hagler, and I had a piece of the options on Minter. We resolved it by agreeing that whoever's guy won, the others would drop out. Obviously, added Aram, Jarvis and Mickey didn't think Minter was going to lose. Mickey Duff had provided the Hagler party with a van and a driver to get them around London. The driver was a lovely kid named John, who had been in enough London club fights that his brains were scrambled by the time he turned 21. John was great behind the wheel. He just couldn't remember directions. So Duff assigned a co-pilot, an old Welsh pug who couldn't drive but knew London like the back of his hand. It didn't take Goody and Pat long to notice that the Welshman spent a lot of the time on the phone. The assumption, undoubtedly correct, was that he was reporting everything he saw back to Duff and Minter. But since everyone assumed he was a spy for the opposition, Goody made sure he didn't see much. At his secluded Provincetown training camp, Hagler was famous for putting himself in jail, spending most of his waking hours brooding in his room and mentally psyching himself up for the task at hand. Except for road work, sparring, and the odd meal in the coffee shop, he followed the same routine in London. It was surprising somewhat when a couple of days before the fight, he appeared downstairs and asked Steve Wainwright and me if we felt like going for a walk. We spent a couple of hours strolling the streets of the British capital. Even though shaven-headed American tourists were a rarity in London back then, Marvin, for the most part, went unrecognized. At a tourist shop, he playfully tried on a London policeman's helmet. I still have the photograph. At one point, we came upon a building site which gave Marvin pause to reflect on his previous occupation. For most of his boxing career, Hagler had to supplement his income working as a labourer for the Petronellis, who had a construction firm. A former relative, Tony Petronelli, a boxer, he had to supplement his income by working for the Petronellis. As Hagler watched the labourers scurry about the London building site, he revealed, more with amusement than rancor, that Tony had been given the job as a bricklayer while he was assigned to be a hod carrier. For years, Marvin had reckoned that he had the better job of the two, until he discovered the disparity of the hourly wages. Now he appeared to be on the verge of supporting his family through his boxing career. Hagler confessed an ambition. He and his wife had talked it over and decided that once they had enough money that they would open a laundrette. The notion of owning a business appealed to him. People who couldn't afford washing machines still had to wash their clothes, he reckoned. And all he and Bertha would have to do would be sit back and watch them plop quarters into his machines. In keeping with another long-standing practice, 2 days in advance of the fight, Goody ordered up the van and had John drive him and Marvin over to Wembley to inspect the venue. It's partly to make sure everything's all right from my standpoint, but mostly to familiarize the fighter, Petronelli explained. We talked about how everything is going to go on the night of the fight, which entrance we were coming in, where our dressing room is, which route we'll take on the ring walk. I want him to be as comfortable as possible and to know what to expect so there won't be any surprises. As we stood up, looking at the empty seats, I reminded him they'd all be full on Saturday night, almost all of them with hostile British fans cheering for Alan Minter. Goody could scarcely have imagined how much he had understated the case, possibly because they have been disappointed so often for so long. British boxing fans don't need much of an excuse to become over-enthusiastic, and Minter himself abetted the jingoistic frenzy in the run-up to the fight when he promised that no black man is going to take his title. By injecting a whiff of racism into the issue, the champion ensured that Hagler's reception at the arena would be nasty. There would be a substantial presence of the anti-immigrant National Front at Wembley that evening, and the prevalent mood was further exacerbated by the outcome of the co-feature, which saw a young British middleweight named Tony Simpson knock out the previously unbeaten American Bobby Coolidge. Around the arena, the bloodthirsty mob enraged in football chants. Many of the spectators had arrived bearing Union Jacks, which they brandished like battle axes. There were even guys dressed up in beef eater costumes. It didn't help either that the concessionaires at Wembley's were selling beer by the caseload. Not even a hard-guzzling Londoner can drink 24 beers in less than 3 rounds. Meaning by the time the fight had reached its premature conclusion, many of the spectators had an abundance of ammunition at hand, empty bowls.